Well, we have a new name for our program that you hear on weekends. It's called Catholic Audio Media Weekends. We're no longer calling it the Bonus Show, calling it Catholic Audio Media Weekend. And this weekend, we're going to listen to Peter Carter. It's an interview I did with him this week. Peter Carter is the co-author of a book entitled The Song of the Lamb, Sacred Music and the Heavenly Liturgy. It's available from Ignatius Press. You can find it at your favorite online or brick-and-mortar bookstore, as well as Ignatius.com. Now, I said he's the co-author, so obviously the question would be, well, who is the other author of this book? And it is, in fact, Robert Cardinal Sarah. It's actually a book that's written as a conversation with Cardinal Sarah about the liturgy, about music in the liturgy, and Peter Carter is a great liturgical musician and a teacher, and what they want to do is build up good liturgies in every parish in our Catholic world. That includes yours. So we're going to hear all about the importance, especially of music at liturgy, from Peter Carter right here on Catholic Audio Media Weekend. And again, the name of the book is The Song of the Lamb, Sacred Music and the Heavenly Liturgy. It comes to us from Ignatius Press, and you can find it at Ignatius.com and your favorite online or brick-and-mortar bookstore. Let's switch over to the interview now. So tell us a little bit about yourself and about Cardinal Sarah.
Well, my name is Peter Carter. I co-wrote this book with Cardinal Sarah called The Song of the Lamb, Sacred Music, and the Heavenly Liturgy. And I work as a church musician. I live in New Jersey, and I have a few hats. One of which is at Princeton University as the music director for the Catholic chaplaincy there. I'm a parish music director. And then also I am the director of an organization called the Catholic Sacred Music Project, which is an organization founded to help train church musicians to have all of the musical skills they need to provide music of the highest level in their parishes and communities. So I'm very involved with church music and have been really my whole life as a kid, and singing in the choir and all of that. And so Cardinal Sarah is, I think, one of my heroes when I look to the church today, of people who really walk the walk and are great examples of how to live a faithful Christian life and what living the gospel really looks like, which I think is especially important today, to have bishops who we can really look up to and respect as successors of the apostles, as they all are, but we need to really still hold fast to Christ's promise that he will be with the church until the end of the world. And so part of that is, I think, we need to maintain our fidelity to the church, our respect for the church's authority, and not become cynical, say, by abuses of power or by false teachers in the church, right? And so Cardinal Sarah has been that voice to me and to many, many others. And so this book was a real privilege of a lifetime to work on it with him and to hear his profound insights on the church's tradition of sacred music, of liturgy, of the spiritual life, and helping to communicate that to the world and to the rest of the church, to anyone who has an interest in these topics.
I can say about him, I've read several of his books. They always inspire me.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, they are just wonderful. And he is Cardinal. What is his title right now?
He's retired, So he's 80 years old.
He's 80? I didn't know that.
He just turned 80 this year.
Wow.
And so he's the prefect emeritus of the Dicastery of Divine Worship.
Oh, okay. Wow. I didn't know he was 80, because he certainly doesn't come across as being 80 years old.
No, not at all. He's very agile and strong, and I think he's the youngest 80-year-old I've ever met.
I can believe that. And he's originally from Guinea.
That's right. So I think that's part of what his the appeal of Cardinal Sarah especially to the Western world, since he is such an orthodox voice on the church's teaching and tradition, but his background is so different from everyone in the West, right? That his experience of the church is really an experience of first-generation Christians. The gospel is just being preached in Guinea for the first time since Christ sent the apostles into the world. So, the beginning of the 20th century, I think it was the Holy Ghost Fathers who were the missionaries in Guinea that converted his village. His parents were converts to the faith, and so he grew up in the faith, but his parents are first-generation Christians from animism. And so it's a radical kind of acceptance of Christianity, of the gospel, that this Christ sent the apostles into the world to preach the good news. And so really fast forward 20 centuries later, or 19 centuries at that point, and the missionaries are going to that corner of the world for the first time and preaching the good news. And so the faith that Cardinal Sarah speaks about is very young, very alive, very vibrant. And that's something that I think is very refreshing for those of us in the West who have had a longer history of the church, of Catholicism, but also have sometimes become cynical because of abuses in Catholic culture, of wounds in the church from the wounds that humans inflict on themselves and on the world. So his voice is particularly refreshing in that way. He's just taking the gospel seriously and trying to live the faith that the missionaries taught him. So it's a very beautiful witness.
And now that you describe him that way, I've come to realize he has a good sense of the animist traditions that preceded his Christianity. So he has an understanding of human living and how Christ impacts that, but I never understood that connection, because he certainly mentions it in the books occasionally about,
right.
That reality that still exists in Africa. But now I understand why he had such a great understanding of this.
Exactly, and even just his perspective on certain aspects of the church's tradition is also in light of his experiences in Guinea, where it's a Muslim majority country. I forget what the percentage is. It might be 60 to 75% or something like that. And then there's animism and Christianity. And so even in conversations regarding certain aspects of the church's tradition, where in the West sometimes they're viewed as derogatory, such as, like, say, imperialist, like, say, the use of Latin or things like that, where it's sometimes seen as cultural imperialism. From Cardinal Sarah's perspective, growing up in Africa, where there's 3 or so predominant languages in Guinea, but, a lot of villages have their own languages. There could be 75 languages in the whole country or something like this. And so there's a few predominant languages, but the use of a sacred language to unite the members of a religion is very normal, both for the Muslims and their use of Arabic as their sacred language. So for the Christians to have Latin as their sacred language, to unite themselves to the universal church as one body, just naturally makes a lot of sense to them. And even on a micro scale, which I hadn't thought about this before he mentioned it, is that even in Guinea, they might not be able to communicate with all of the other people from all the other Christians in Guinea if they don't know all the languages. It's not just one language per the country. So it even unites the Catholics in that country in a way. So I hadn't even thought of that on that kind of smaller scale, which is very true.
One of the things that popped in my mind when he was talking about a worship language is when I was in Ecuador and I was learning Spanish then. I speak Spanish and Portuguese, and I was learning Spanish then. So I wasn't quite there yet. But then the people I was talking to, were trying to get through it. And then they started singing the Agnus Dei. And it just clicked in right away because it was familiar, obviously, and everything else, because I understood that.
Right.
And so you're right. And he brings up that, let me build on something else in light of that, because he brings up the need of the Latin language, or that sacred language, actually, is the way he really explains it. But he begins, or the two of you begin the book by talking about the need for a good musical liturgy in the liturgy.
That's right.
And one of the fascinating things that as I'm reading this, and you just brought it up now, is I'm thinking, well, this is Cardinal Sarah. Wherever Cardinal Sarah goes, he's always going to have, if he's in another country visiting a diocese, they're going to bring out the best musicians and the best singers and the best everything.
Sure.
But he is talking about having that experience in every parish. Or actually, so you both are talking about having that experience in every parish. So that reality of understanding for everyone, and you were talking about at the very beginning, teaching this liturgical music to help people understand the importance of, as you both say, to bring it up to worship.
Right. And I think that's part of what's inherent in the act of worship, is that we need to give the best of ourselves, the first fruits of our labors for the glory of God. So that is true for all the aspects of worship. The highest act that a creature can give is the worship of his creator. And so particularly in the Christian worship, we're uniting ourselves with Christ's offering to the Father. But even just on a natural level, that's why we want the churches to look beautiful, to be the best of human genius can provide, not just to be good enough, not just to be fine, not just be okay, but to really be representative of the best that we could offer. And so it's the same thing in regards to all the aspects of the liturgy, all of the music, all of the vestments. The best that we can is what God deserves. So if we skimp on that, we are not prioritizing the right things. We're not pouring the costly oil on Christ's head as Mary Magdalene did. And, that's the classic accusation of the church shouldn't be using its money on basically on having nice things, on giving the best, most beautiful worship to God that we can. And Christ rebukes Judas and says, the poor you always have with you, but I am not with you always. So the giving the first fruits of our labors for the glory of God is what Christ teaches us. And of course, that doesn't mean that we look the other way for all of the other important things, for the poor, which, again, the church is the largest humanitarian organization in the world. So it's a lazy accusation to kind of throw that around, that, well, the church has all these riches and art and architecture and blah, blah, blah. that's, just a finger wagging that doesn't take into consideration the whole reality.
And, I used to work in the inner city. I've always been kind of a city priest. And I remember bringing people, and these were, young adults who were in danger of being grabbed in by gangs. Some of them already had, and, kind of bringing them into the church. And walking into the Cathedral of the Holy Cross in Boston was life-changing for them. And that was just the whole...
I mean, that's a magnificent cathedral, right? And that's the whole aspect of the theology, even of the architecture, is that the church represents heaven. And the liturgy represents what's happening in heaven, the eternal worship of God. And so when people partake in the liturgy, or even you're ministering to these people, even when they enter the church for the first time and encounter something that takes their breath away, that's more beautiful than they could have imagined if they haven't experienced things like that, you're giving them a glimpse of the beauty of God. It's kind of, where everything is still, of course, through a glass darkly, as St. Paul says, but it's still a much more vivid image that's being reflected. That also is important because it reflects something deeper. If we don't have experienced beauty and goodness, we have a hard time imagining that God is beautiful and all good and all true, right? We have to encounter it through these kind of lesser means through which God is reflected in the world. I mean, and that's the whole formation of becoming human is, we encounter the love of our mother and father as they care for us. And if that's properly done, it's very easy to believe in an all-loving God despite the suffering in the world, because we've experienced profound love in our formation, right? So helping to prepare the heart for the truth. And then in terms of the liturgy and the truths of the faith, it's preparing our hearts for heaven and for the worship of God forever in heaven. And through music, I mean, it again helps to provide that glimpse. It helps to prepare the heart to take delight in the praise of God, which is so important, that we need to know how to love the act of praising God and worshiping God and want to be doing that forever in heaven, right? As opposed to just kind of having sensory delights forever in heaven, right? Thinking of it as some sort of kind of hedonistic paradise or something. No, it's a complete act of looking at the person and source of all goodness, truth, and beauty.
Your explanation and, what Cardinal Sauer says in the book really is so excellently explained because, I've been a priest for 32 years, but one of my rules when I walk into a parish, now I do hospital ministry, but when I walk into a parish is I don't ask me music questions because I'm not a musician. So I always do that. And but at the same time, what you always hear is, what you often hear is, well, people may want some of the older hymns because they like the old hymns, or they want some of the newer hymns because they like the newer hymns. But as you see in the book, it's like, no. It's more than that. It's what is the music we're going to use in order to glorify God.
Exactly. And is the primary purpose of the music for ourselves and what we like, or is it primarily about the worship of God, right? And they're not, ideally, they're not mutually exclusive, right? Especially if we have kind of really properly ordered desires and affections towards music, right? It's kind of like food. We should learn to love the things that are good for us and not just tolerate them, right? So it's the same thing in regards to music. And I think the important beginning of an examination of conscience for people to have about, say, this approach to music, and for whether that's for music directors or pastors to kind of analyze of, are we giving the best we can to God? Is this really an appropriate hymn or this or that, is filtering it through that lens of, is this, are we giving the best beauty and glory we can to God, or are we just doing what's good enough, or what just makes, the fewest people complain type of thing? And so obviously those are not the right questions we need to be asking. There is a certain pragmatic level, sure. And, I always tell my choir members and people in the congregation, if you have a favorite hymn that you would like us to sing, please let me know. It has to kind of fall into the range of appropriate sacred music. I'm not going to pull out something from left field, but at the same time, there is that kind of pragmatic, ministerial aspect of, no, this is a good hymn. It's fine hymn. We just haven't programmed it in maybe a year. So sure, why not? And then that makes that person's day. And I'm happy to do that, right? That's kind of the approach of this book, is helping to provide principles, lenses through which people can look at their situation to understand the church's teaching. But rather than, say, trying to create a blacklist of hymns, of never do these hymns or whatnot, and just trying to, say, micromanage or make decisions for people, a lot of those things are best handled on the local level. I think especially, again, this primary text is in English, but it's already being translated into a number of languages. So if it was too honed in on the American context, it wouldn't be adaptable to, say, Latin America and things like that.
There's a little inside baseball. We're going to get back to the interview in a minute, but I thought I'd just share with you a little inside baseball on this interview. So I live at a convent. Remember, I'm a hospital chaplain during the day. And here we are talking about liturgical music. And at the convent during Christmas, they play Christmas music on a carillon. So as I'm doing this interview, I don't know if you can hear it. I edited it out as much as I could. I'm listening to like Frosty the Snowman being played on the grounds of the convent on a carillon, and I'm trying to really build a good solid understanding of this liturgical music. So it was a rather ironic experience, and we're going to get back to it in a minute. In the meantime, keep in mind you're listening to this interview with Peter Carter. He is the co-author of a book with Robert Cardinal Sarah, The Song of the Lamb, Sacred Music and the Heavenly Liturgy, comes to us from Ignatius Press, and you can find it at ignatius.com and on your favorite I almost said favorite podcast platform. That wouldn't work. And your favorite brick and mortar and online bookstore. We're going to take a break, and we will be right back right after this. Did you know that the Catholic Audio Media podcast is available on various podcast platforms? You can find us, among others, on Podbean, which is our home platform. You can find it on Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeart, among others. Just look for Catholic Audio Media, all one word. On some platforms, such as Spotify, look for Catholic Audio Media, 3 words, and subscribe and listen to the Catholic Audio Media podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to us on Patreon. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Patreon.com/Catholic Audio Media. Check us out. Check what we have to offer. Previews of upcoming podcasts. Previews of upcoming columns over at catholicaudiomedia.substack.com. Your ability to comment, make suggestions, even make suggestions in upcoming programs. Check us out, patreon.com, Catholic Audio Media. Let's return to our interview with Peter Carter, who, of course, is the co-author with Cardinal Robert Sarah of The Song of the Lamb, Sacred Music and the Heavenly Liturgy, from Ignatius Press, available at ignatius.com and your favorite online and brick-and-mortar bookstore. So we're switching back to our interview right now, where we're talking about the music experiences in different cultures. Particularly, we're going to focus for a minute on Latin America. Now, I've worked in Latin America, and one of the things I notice in my own experience is, of course, we know that in Latin America, you have a lot of times the I guess you'd call it the electric piano or the electric organ or whatever.
Sure, yeah, the keyboard.
Yeah, and then you have guitars. But part of the reason for that is you're in the rural areas where you're not going to get an organ out there.
Yeah, I mean, organs are expensive, and there's a lot of care that has to, like, just they require a lot of time and financial investment, which is why I think that is so important to have that principle of, again, trying not to focus too much on the specific micromanaging of, say, outlawing keyboards or things like that, or guitars and all these contexts, but providing the principles of, it has to be sacred. It's not, you're not going to, if you have a guitar, you're not going to be jamming rock music, right? And just put sacred words over the top. No, it has to fit with the sacred character. I remember, I've played keyboard for masses, using just, say, the organ setting. For masses in Chile, I've been there a few times, and that's what they had. And even, this was funny, I was on a retreat once, a men's retreat with Cardinal Burke, and there wasn't much of a chapel, and there was no instrument, but they had a keyboard. And so I was playing a dinky little keyboard on the organ setting as Cardinal Burke is celebrating Mass. And it was just so funny because it wasn't like a really nice chapel at all. It was kind of, a hall turned into a chapel, and we're making the best of the situation, right? But that's the principle. We're just giving the best we can to God right now and not worry about, what is lacking. Christ fulfills everything that is lacking in ourselves and our sacrifice, but he also wants us to offer our sacrifices to give the best that we can, and he'll fulfill everything that is lacking.
Oh, that's a good point. Yes. And in light of that, what I've found is, and this, when we do music, and of course I'm speaking not as necessarily a musician. I do play the guitar, but I don't play it that often. Is to be yourself in music, and by that I mean, I've seen many movements here in the United States that try to duplicate the Latin American experience in churches here, and I'm like, no, the Latin American experience comes from Latin America for a reason, and you're trying to make that because of the nature of the sound, which is great, but that's not your experience, and that's right. Not you, and it sounds, you can tell right away.
Sure. One of the things that struck me as just very different, I haven't been to any country in South America besides Chile, but they don't have hymnals there, right? So there's most of the hymns and things they sing, people, I guess they learn just by rote, and it's what they hear and sing along, but there's not a culture of hymnals, right? So that was just an interesting difference, and you probably have, a lot more varied experiences of that as well, of just, the way people make music in different countries is reflective of their culture, of all of these things. And, and again, not speaking of necessarily one way or is better than another, but like it's, if a congregation, or I would say in the U.S., but particularly say in the U.K., where like they are they sing very much as a community more broadly than in the U.S., where it can be sometimes a little bit, some communities do, some don't. But say in the U.K., they're very like, they do what's in the book or the pamphlet, and everybody's singing the hymn. That's the way they've been taught in school since they're little. That's what they do in church. But they don't have that culture at all. If they, in Chile, in my experience, and of say printing worship aids, like that's just not a thing, right? Or hymnals, and so that's why the principles of the liturgy don't change. They adapt to what things are going to look like, but spiritually, it's the same for everyone, and how it's expressed. That's why the missionary initiatives of adapting to what those particular needs are so important, because you have to look at what do these people need most, in how will they best hear the gospel, how can they best unite themselves with Christ and his sacrifice, and then adapting to those needs, right? As opposed to just like trying to force feed that it needs to be this way. We need to get everyone a hand missile, or we need to buy hymnals for Chile or something. Now, like, it doesn't have to be one way is the right way, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And again, that whole issue of bringing the music out that works best, and one of the things that, of course, you'll have one group that'll say they only want Latin hymns and we should only sing Latin hymns, and then there are others that say no, we have the more contemporary music we can use, and that's where you get into the micromanaging what works best. But I think the Cardinal seems to be explaining really a combination of both, but you want it to be liturgical.
Right.
And I mean, every time I do adoration, I always finish with the Tantum Ergo. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's just done, especially in an English language community, but I found that the other communities, the other language communities, don't know that song. But
okay.
it still is important that it's sung, and a lot of times it needs to. This is one of the issues. It needs to be sung well if it's not a cappella, so you get the good accompaniment and stuff. And one of the things I thought of is, as you were talking about different parishes and everything else, in some parishes, they're not there yet.
Sure.
Trying to bring in that musician that understands all that and can play really well what you're looking to hear. And I mean, I've been blessed to have some really great musicians. We had a Spanish language musician who was a volunteer in one of my parishes, who was a graduate from the Santo Domingo, what do you call it? It wasn't School of Music.
Conservatory?
Conservatory, that's the word I was looking for. Conservatory, I was like, and he, when they would sing, I'm like, this is a CD. And they said, no, this is a
Yeah.
It was so powerful. It was in Spanish. It was so powerful. And that's, I guess, really the goal is to make that really powerful, wonderful music that glorifies God, and that really does that.
Yeah, I mean, and that's my motivation in my organization, the Catholic Sacred Music Project, to help promote the education, particularly of church musicians who really set the musical tone for their communities and lead them in their music education and their musical offering to God. But that is, that's an act of, say, building up culture, which needs to happen at the local level. Culture is just how we live. And so we don't need to wait for someone to come in and help to, say, uplift the culture. It's, even say in regards to music, we can all sing. We all have a voice. We're not all going to be, great singers, but the church has the liturgy sung as the normative mode of the liturgy. And so we can all learn, the simple chants like the Agnus Dei that you mentioned, and, simple hymns like the Pange Lingua or the Tantum Ergo. These things are just part of our cultural and religious identity of being Catholics. We are part of the Latin Rite. And so if we don't know the Tantum Ergo, are we really receiving the tradition of the church through Thomas Aquinas, who wrote that hymn? And this is part of who we are as Catholics. And a genuine act of worship doesn't need to be something that I can understand completely or be representative of the best that I know right now. And that's one of the fundamental attitudes that I really appreciate that Cardinal Sarah speaks about in this book, is that, no, we don't need to have the liturgy and the music of the liturgy represent us. The apostles had the humility to ask our Lord, Lord, teach us to pray. And so that should be our attitude when we go to the liturgy, when we learn the music of the church, whether, Gregorian chant as kind of the foundation of the church's musical tradition, but there's a wide tradition that extends much beyond it. But that should be our attitude of, towards the church. Teach us to pray. Help us to teach us to pray through the liturgy. This is Christ sent the apostles into the world to baptize the world, to unite them to his sacrifice. So the baptism is a liturgy. He teaches them the Our Father, which is part of the liturgical prayer. This is the way that Christ, his vision for salvation of the world is through the church and through the church's liturgy. So we have to have the humility to accept that tradition, that expression of Christ's authority passed on through the church, and also to be formed by the church's tradition through the ages, the best works of and expressions of religious art, architecture, music, and really be formed in that, because there is so much. Otherwise, we kind of risk starting from ground zero, right? And not inheriting what really is our tradition and right as Catholics.
And he talks about, and I don't know if we see this in the United States as much as we did at one time, but he talks about being careful of innovations. With the priest when he's celebrating Mass.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm going to tell you something. Every time I mention this, especially to liturgists, it's like one of those things you have to revive the person after you say this. But I remember when I was first coming back to the church, I was in Long Beach, California, and what they did is they gave out the Eucharist to adults, but children who hadn't received the Eucharist yet, they gave out animal crackers in pretty much the same way. And I remember, anytime I mention that, they just go, "No, we're not doing that." And I said, "I know we're not, but I want to let you know. I mean, these were some of the innovations I've seen." And and he makes it clear that, just what you're saying, it's really obedience to the liturgy is you can bring in some cultural issues in light of it, but it's really obedience to the spirit of the liturgy, because we're praying in this unified way throughout the church.
Exactly, and obedience to the liturgical laws that the church has set, right? Because otherwise, you have nothing kind of to prevent you from the tyranny of good intentions, right? Do all the things wrong, but have all the right intentions. Because then you can just have contradictory practices one week to the next, and you don't have kind of safeguards of those things. I mean, not to kind of, again, good arguments could be made for, say, aspects of innovative things, but they don't have to be inside the liturgy. You can do some things outside of the liturgy that can help form and prepare people to understand the liturgy, to partake in it. I mean, that's the same idea of Christmas pageants, right? It's not a liturgical celebration, but it's a fun celebration that helps teach kids, especially the story of Christ's birth. It helps to keep the story alive, to form them and make it fun, make it accessible for them, so that as they continue to grow and develop, they understand the incarnation on a deeper level, that it becomes part of who they are. So whether that's kind of presented in, a play that's by children for their parents, and it's not really intended to be something of high artistic merit, but it's really intended to just form the kids, right, and to teach them and still make it fun and all of those things. That's serving that purpose well. That's not what the liturgy is about. So that's a fine thing, but let's keep that outside of the liturgy, and let's keep the purpose of the liturgy for liturgical acts, right? And so all of that makes sense. We don't have to kind of bash one thing or another, but it's kind of just having things in their proper order, because otherwise we draw the liturgy down to dumb it down for children in that way, which is not keeping to the reverence due to the liturgy. It's not keeping obedience to what the church tells us to do in the performance of the liturgy as well.
And one of my favorite lines, I use it all the time, is, I forget who it comes from, it's not mine, is if you use, it's actually more about preaching, but if you preach to the children in order to get to the adults, you'll touch neither. And so one of the things I do for a family mass is I'll tell stories. And that hits children and adults. Sometimes the adults ask the children, well, what did that symbol mean? Or something like that. I'm fascinated. But I never will do a children's homily specifically because I remember that. It was one of the first things I learned as a priest. Don't do that.
Right. It can feel manipulative too.
Yeah. Well, we have actually talked longer than 30 minutes, and I could talk with you for hours, but I don't think you have that much time.
I'm sure. This has been fun. Yeah,
Great.
This is great. I mean, I talked with Cardinal Sarah for hours and hours about all this and put it all in a book. So I love talking about it and communicating. I mean, again, it's just part of the good news of preaching the gospel, but the way that is happening and the gospel being preached and the liturgy, its prophetic nature of the vision of heaven and our participation in that. It is very exciting and beautiful, and I think a lot of Catholics have not thought about it, don't understand it quite in that way, of that prophetic reality of what the Mass really is and what heaven really is, and it's preparing our hearts and minds and souls for the worship of God forever in heaven.
Well, I want to thank you for this time. And the name of the book is The Song of the Lamb, Sacred Music and the Heavenly Liturgy, by Robert Cardinal Sarah, in conversation with Peter Carter, who we are speaking with right now. And it's available at Ignatius Press and pretty much any bookstore, online or brick and mortar, I assume?
That's right. Yep.
Excellent. Very
right.
good.
Well, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed talking with you and being on your show. I really appreciate it.
Same here. And have a blessed week and blessed Christmas.
You too. Yeah, likewise. Have a Merry Christmas.
And again, that was Peter Carter. He is the co-author of the book with Robert Cardinal Sarah, The Song of the Lamb, Sacred Music and the Heavenly Liturgy. Comes to us from Ignatius Press. You can find it at ignatius.com and at your favorite online or brick-and-mortar bookstore. Obviously, if they don't have it on the shelf, just go and order it, and they will be happy to do that for you. But The Song of the Lamb, Sacred Liturgy, Sacred Music, and the Heavenly Liturgy from the fine folks at ignatius.com. We're going to be back on Monday for the fourth week of Advent, which traditionally is, or actually not even traditionally, just anachrostically, it is the shortest week. It's only going until Wednesday night when we go into Christmas Eve and the Vigil of Christmas. So we're going to go to 1 Samuel on Monday and learn about Eli and the birth of Samuel. Fascinating story. It's just really about his birth and bringing the child to Eli. Fascinating story. We'll be looking at that probably later on in the year. But we're going to learn about Samuel, so that'll come up on Monday. So we will see you then. Have yourself a blessed weekend. Subscribe, comment, let people know. Thank you for all the likes you've been giving to our podcast. Let people know where you find us and all the great topics of all different types you hear at the Catholic Audio Media Podcast. Have yourself a blessed weekend. The Catholic teaching in this podcast is reflected and presented as accurately as possible. The opinions expressed are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Archdiocese of Boston or any other institution.